The grand dining room of the five-star restaurant sparkled, as if every crystal chandelier was competing with the stars outside. Polished marble reflected golden light. Silverware gleamed like ornaments, and the faint notes of a piano drifted softly in the air. Every guest seated there radiated refinement. Men in tailored suits leaned back in confidence. Women in sequin gowns moved their hands elegantly as they spoke, laughter rolling like polished coins across the room. The space breathed wealth, power, and exclusivity. Yet in the midst of this orchestrated elegance sat one woman whose presence was unlike the others. She was not dressed in glittering jewels, nor in the latest Parisian gown. Instead, she wore a dark kimono-style dress, dignified in its simplicity. Her silver hair was pinned neatly, her face etched not just with age, but with decades of wisdom and endurance. Her hands, though trembling slightly, held a small pen at her chest as though it anchored her. Everyone knew who she was the moment she entered. Whispers spread in hushed tones. That's her, the Japanese businesswoman who built an empire in Tokyo. She's in New York on investment matters, I heard. She came alone? No assistants. Their speculation only heightened curiosity. She was a millionaire, yes, but unlike others of her rank, she had walked in without translators, secretaries, or a crowd of admirers. She had come alone, carrying herself with quiet strength, but when the waiter placed a leather-bound menu before her, something shifted. Her eyes moved across the English words with confusion. She tried to speak, but her heavily accented phrases stumbled into silence. Her uncertainty was subtle at first, a pause too long, a soft shake of her head. But soon the tension thickened. The waiter leaned forward, repeating items slowly as if volume could break a language barrier. Another staff member came over, gesturing awkwardly at the menu, speaking faster, then louder. The woman's lips trembled as she attempted to answer, but her sentences collapsed into fragments no one understood. Around her, guests exchanged looks. Some smirked discreetly behind their champagne glasses. Others shook their heads with mild impatience. The admiration that had filled the room when she entered was fading into discomfort. How strange, they thought, that a woman who commanded boardrooms and financial empires could not order dinner without struggle. But behind her controlled posture, her eyes betrayed something more piercing than embarrassment. Loneliness. A loneliness carved not by wealth or age, but by the helplessness of being unheard. She clutched her pendant tighter, her hands trembling against a linen tablecloth, silently wishing someone, anyone, would understand. As the scene unfolded, one pair of eyes lingered on her more than the rest. Emily, a young waitress barely into her 20s. Emily had spent most of the evening refilling water, carrying stacks of plates, and clearing tables no one else wanted. She was new, assigned to the less glamorous tasks. Her plain uniform slightly wrinkled, her ponytail loosened from hours of rushing between tables. Her name tag, crooked on her chest, read simply Emily. She was not supposed to approach guests of this caliber. VIP tables were reserved for the most experienced servers. But Emily could not ignore what she saw. Something stirred inside her, something familiar, her grandmother. Emily had grown up with a Japanese grandmother who never fully mastered English, even after decades in America. As a child, Emily would sit with her at the kitchen table, listening to the soft flow of Japanese words. At school, she had translated her grandmother's requests, explained her sentences when shopkeepers grew impatient, bridged the gap when others rolled their eyes. To her classmates, it was irrelevant. To her family, it was a quiet gift. That gift was now pressing on her heart. She glanced at her manager. He was frowning, whispering with another server about the situation, frustration clear in his tone. This was not her table. It was not her place. Yet the sight of the millionaire woman shrinking under judgment made Emily take a breath and step forward. As Emily approached, the chatter around the dining room dimmed. Some diners leaned forward, intrigued. Others raised brows at the sight of a junior waitress daring to approach such a powerful guest. Emily bent slightly, her expression warm and gentle, and spoke softly, this time not in English, but in Japanese. The effect was immediate. The older woman froze, eyes widening in disbelief. For a heartbeat, she said nothing, only staring at the young waitress. Then Emily repeated herself, slower, her words careful yet natural. Tears welled in the woman's eyes. She parted her lips, and suddenly the words flowed, graceful, fluent, rich with emotion. Relief washed over her like sunlight after storm clouds. For the first time that evening, she smiled. Emily answered without hesitation, her Japanese steady. She listened attentively, nodded, and then turned to translate the order to the kitchen with clarity the staff had been unable to achieve. In an instant, the barrier dissolved. The millionaire, who moments before it seemed isolated and vulnerable, was laughing softly, her voice carrying gratitude. The restaurant fell into silence. Guests who had smirked minutes earlier now sat in awe. Even the pianist's fingers paused on the keys. The power of the moment was undeniable. Dignity restored not by wealth or reputation, but by the compassion of a young woman who remembered her grandmother's language. Emily remained at her side for the rest of the evening, assisting when needed, translating requests, offering reassurance with a simple smile. She didn't hover, but she was there, quietly making sure the woman was seen, heard, and understood. And the room, once buzzing with laughter about status and wealth, now observed something more profound. In a sea of diamonds and tailored suits, the most powerful act had come from a plain uniformed waitress who chose empathy over protocol. The rest of the evening unfolded differently than anyone had imagined. Where once the air had been tight with discomfort, now there was a hush of reverence. Guests whispered not about wealth or prestige, but about the courage of a young waitress who had stepped forward when others had looked away. The Japanese businesswoman seemed transformed. No longer tense, no longer shrinking under incomprehension. She was dignified once more, laughing gently, speaking in her own language with grace. Her hands, once trembling on the tablecloth, now moved with calm assurance as she conversed with Emily. Emily stayed by her side just enough to help, never intruding, never making the woman feel helpless. She translated the order, explained subtle details about the menu, and reassured her with small nods. When the main course arrived, it was served exactly as she had wished. When tea was poured, she smiled softly, bowing her head in thanks. The shift was undeniable. The millionaire was no longer an outsider in the room. She was, once again, a guest of honor. But perhaps the most striking change was not in the woman herself, but in those who watched. The other diners, who had moments before dismissed or struggled with smirks, now leaned back in silence. Many lowered their eyes, chastened by the quiet lesson unfolding in front of them. Wealth and education had filled the room, but it was a young woman with messy hair and an imperfect uniform who had reminded them of something far greater than status. Humanity. Even Emily's strict manager, who had frowned when she first approached, stood off to the side, no longer scowling. He realized what she had done mattered more than polished glasses or folded napkins. Emily had given the restaurant something it could never buy: compassion in its truest form. When the meal ended, the millionaire woman rose slowly from her chair. She did not leave in silence. Instead, she reached for Emily's hand, her grip surprisingly strong, her silver hair catching the light. Tears gathered in her eyes as she whispered words only Emily could understand. They were words of gratitude, words carrying depth that required no translation for the heart. Emily's throat tightened, her eyes glistening as she bowed slightly in respect. The woman's driver appeared to escort her out, but before leaving, she held Emily's hand one last time, her gaze lingering with unmistakable warmth. The door closed behind her, and the dining room buzzed again, but this time in a different tone. Conversations were softer, more thoughtful. Guests who had come to flaunt diamonds and influence now sat reflecting on the quiet girl who had changed the evening story. Yet, what happened that night was only the beginning. Weeks later, Emily arrived at the restaurant on an ordinary afternoon, her hair tied back, ready for another long shift. The hostess called her name at the front desk, handing her an envelope. It was cream-colored, embossed with elegant Japanese characters. Her heart skipped as she unfolded it carefully. Inside was a handwritten letter, penned in delicate strokes of Japanese calligraphy. Emily's breath caught as she began to read. The millionaire woman had not forgotten her. She wrote about that night, about how Emily had restored her dignity when she had felt invisible. She explained how, In a foreign city full of wealth and status, only one voice had reached her. The voice of a young waitress who carried her grandmother's tongue like a quiet treasure. At the bottom of the letter was an invitation. The woman requested Emily's presence at a Cultural Foundation event in New York City. Not as staff, not as a server, but as an honored guest. And tucked alongside the invitation was something Emily never expected, a scholarship offer. The letter revealed that the woman had learned of Emily's struggles, how she was attending community college, studying languages, but barely managing tuition. She wanted to sponsor Emily's education, to give her the means to carry her gift further, to support the voice that had once reached out when no one else did. Emily's hands shook as tears filled her eyes. She pressed a letter to her chest, overwhelmed. She had not thought her small act of kindness mattered beyond that single night. She had simply remembered her grandmother and chosen compassion. Yet that choice had opened a door she never imagined. The scholarship changed her life. Years later, Emily would stand on stages across the world, not as a waitress in a wrinkled uniform, but as a professional translator, a cultural bridge connecting people who might otherwise remain strangers. She traveled to Tokyo, Paris, Sao Paulo, and countless other places, carrying with her the memory of that evening. She often recalled the millionaire's tearful eyes, the hush that had fallen over the dining room, and the lesson that had crystallized in her heart. Dignity is priceless, and kindness outweighs all riches. People admired her career, her fluency in languages, her ability to bridge cultures. But when she was asked where it began, Emily always smiled softly and told the same story. She told them the grand restaurant, the crystal chandeliers, the woman with silver hair who could not order her dinner. She told them of her trembling decision to step forward, to speak in a language she thought she might never use again. And she told them of the truth she learned that night. It is not wealth or power that makes the greatest difference in a room full of people. It is the smallest act of humanity. The courage to speak when others stay silent. The willingness to understand when others turn away. If this story touched your heart, please remember, what people will carry long after the chandeliers dim and the laughter fades is not how much we own, but how much kindness we shared. Because sometimes the quietest voice, the voice no one expects, can carry the greatest impact.